Hello and welcome to another episode of the Life Adventurist podcast. This is the place to be if you love all things about life adventure and spirituality, especially spirituality, because I really, really love talking about these types of topics and ultimately helping you come back to home in your heart, really understand who you are authentically as a person without all of the other bullshit that has been programmed into you. And of course, have the most fun possible ever. I mean, hello, it's called the Life Adventurist podcast. So there's always a reason for these kind of things. Another thing I wanted to mention is one thing that I'm really coming to really love about this podcast and what my intention is that you guys hear me in a lot of solo episodes, and then occasionally you hear a guest come on the podcast. And it's really important for me to bring on guests who are aligned with where we're going in the season, or, I feel like they have something of value to bring, or like always, I want to help bring new perspectives and new ways for you to think. And it's up to you if you want to take any of the stuff that's shared, but I really want to help you to expand your mind, to be introduced to things that maybe you don't know much about. And to be completely honest, today's episode is a bit of that for me, because with Rick he's our guest, so I kind of gave it away. But Rick is our guest today, and I am super excited to have him on because he sits in an aspect of the spiritual world that honestly, and we were talking about this before, I don't know a ton about. So I'm like a total newbie, like maybe you are if you're listening to this. But before we get into the episode, let me share with you a bit about Rick and I'll bring him on. So Rick has been called a psychic, a medium, tarot reader, a sound healer, a channeler, and a few more things that can't be repeated in polite company. And we will talk a little bit about labels and stuff when we get in. He prefers to refer to himself as a spiritualist whose goal is to advocate for your individual spiritual path by giving voice to guides, ancestors, and the departed. So cool. Tarot has been a part of his life for 22 years, providing a confident foundation for his public-facing readings. For the last few years, he's been directly channeling a group of entities called The Collective. More to come on that. And in 2018, Rick started tarotfellow.com to provide learning resources, services, readings, and an online metaphysical shop that hosts over 7,000 metaphysical items. Holy crap, that's amazing. And we're going to have to talk about that because we didn't even ever really talk about that in depth. And where everyone can find the items needed for their spiritual practice, regardless of whether that practice is in alignment with Rick's own. So let's bring Rick on to the podcast. Hello, Rick. Welcome.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Of course. You know what? And I totally should have asked you this before. How the heck, we've talked so many times, how do you pronounce your last name?
Right. Well, so we've very much simplified it. We pronounce it Chiantaretto.
Chiantaretto. Oh, that's so easy.
Ignore half the letters and you got it, right?
Yeah, I'm like Chianti with it, like a wine.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it was originally pronounced. Yes.
Oh, how fun. Well, welcome to the show. And, honestly, like we were talking about, you have all these different, you're a psychic, you're a sound healer, you're a tarot, right, all these things. Before we talk about labels, is there anything else that you want to share about yourself? Who are you?
Oh boy.
Beyond, the bio.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, that is challenging. I've in the bio, I really like that word advocate. I think that's what I like doing. That's who I want to be. I want to be seen as an advocate for, not only the living in their spiritual practices, but for those departed, that those who have passed on, right? Who don't get a voice. And anybody who doesn't have a voice seems to be where I kind of fit in with life, the oddballs, the outcasts, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's who I am. I'm an oddball and an outcast.
You know what? I'll tell you, it's interesting. Just something I feel really drawn to share right now with what you said is that I grew up kind of like an average kid, right? And I always wanted to be a part of the popular kids. And I was probably on the outer skirts of that, right? And I always wanted to be normal, and I always wanted to be like everyone else. And those who were the oddballs, I was kind of nervous around them growing up because I just didn't know, right? And now that I'm an adult, I'm like, the oddballs, I think, are the coolest people because they're willing to just own who they are,
Yeah, I
be
totally
themselves,
agree. Yeah.
even though society and culture and whatever tells them like you're not supposed to be this way or that way, and they're like, "Fuck it, I'm
Yeah.
doing it," you know.
I'm authentic. Deal with it. Right.
Like
Yeah.
I really admire the oddballs and the outcasts because I feel like they're a lot of times like the really true people. And I'm
Agreed.
sure, like any other sector, I'm sure there's people in that sector too who probably aren't even living there. They're covering up who they authentically are because we all are humans.
Yep.
So that's fun. So, all right. So, this episode, I'm excited to talk about this. We're talking about tarot. And I
Yes.
said this episode because I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. We're actually doing a two-part series here with Rick, which is something really special.
Oh, thank
So
you.
this series is completely dedicated to talking about tarot, what it is, just demystifying and debunking some of the common beliefs, I guess you could say, that exist currently. So let's just start with like the basic thing, like what is tarot? Like
Yeah,
what is
absolutely. So I'm going to butcher this word because I always do, but tarot is a form of cartomancy. Is
it? Okay.
that how you say it?
Okay.
um, that follows a very specific rule set. So I kind of like to think of it as a hierarchy where you have, cartomancy in general, and then you have oracle decks, right?
Mhm.
And tarot is an oracle deck, but every tarot deck will follow more or less the same amount of rules. So there's a central theme, a central story that every tarot deck that you pick up will have, whereas oracle decks have the freedom to, define their own stories and their own card meanings as the deck creator prefers.
Okay, so simple. Like you're just
Yeah,
yeah, it's just another divination tool. Like,
yeah.
so I mean, I feel like I just want to kind of just go straight in is like, well, isn't it, this like evil, devilish cult? I don't even know the words, but like, ooh, stay away from tarot. I don't do tarot. I only do oracle because it's rainbows and butterflies.
Right? That's true. Well, so earlier we were talking a lot about labels,
Yeah.
right? And I think that tarot gets a lot of these negative labels. And I spent a lot of time actually thinking about why that is and maybe what happened in society at the time.
Mhm.
Tarot now is getting to be quite mainstream,
Makes sense.
but it hasn't always been, right? As
Mhm.
people are discovering, those labels are kind of falling away. But I can give you some examples of why I think it was truly pigeonholed in that way.
Oh,
Does that
yes.
work?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
like juicy. I'm so lovely.
I've got the deck stacked. So, okay.
That's awesome.
So of course we can start with the devil, right? Yes, tarot decks do have a devil card, right? And so I think that a lot of people shy away from it because of this card in particular,
Mm. Mhm.
which surprises me a little bit because even in terms of, you know, the Bible and the traditionally accepted spirituality frameworks, right? Most of them have the devil too.
Mm.
And so I don't think that we can label tarot as evil because of the devil. I think that's one of the myths that we can immediately debunk, right?
Mhm.
But I do think there's a lot of other reasons. So tarot also has a lot of other figures like that. It's got the Hierophant, who's a
Mhm.
representation of the Pope, right?
Okay.
So that would be a good card in terms of comparison to those religious structures, right?
Mhm.
There are angels, like in the Lovers, and
Mhm.
in Temperance, and in Judgment, like we
Okay.
see angels throughout the tarot deck, right?
Uh-huh.
So those can't be the reason why tarot is considered occult or bad. But I think here are the reasons why. The first card is the High Priestess. And I think that this card puts women spiritually on the same playing field as men. In fact, she's often viewed to be more spiritual than the Hierophant,
Hmm.
right? We have the Queen of Pentacles, who decided to nurture her job and the physical aspects of her life instead of having children.
Hmm.
We have Strength, who teaches us that a fair maiden is more powerful than a lion. And we have the Sun, which teaches us that our inner child, our inner flame, that voice inside of us, is more powerful than any of the heavenly hosts.
Hmm.
So much so that the sunflowers in the card turn their face to the child instead of the sun.
Hmm.
And so we have all of these stories of this incredible personal empowerment, of not needing a structure to find that internal voice, right? And placing women in these roles that were originally designed or uh, societally male, right?
Right.
And so I think we are challenging that male patriarchal religious society
Mhm.
in tarot,
Mhm.
and that is my opinion on one of the reasons why it is viewed as a cult, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I don't know if you happen to look into this, and it's okay if you didn't. Um, you know, I feel like I don't know a ton about this, so I'm totally speaking off the cuff, but like, you know, back when witches were burned at the stake, it's because they were doing all this magic and it was just like unknown and black magic and what are you doing? I wonder if there was also group or groups of people throughout time who were using this as a divination tool, and
Yeah,
therefore it was just, I guess, scary, especially to religious, like, what's the word? I don't know, like religious
group
rules,
structures. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
structure, you know, a lot of religion. I mean, I've heard, even doing Akashic record readings, I've had people mention, you know, like, well, you know, uh, family's
yeah,
not really into this, but I am, and you know, I had
yeah,
kind of have to keep this quiet because you know they think I'm speaking to the devil or something.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think again, it's just those labels that get assigned to things that then gain momentum because it's backed by powerful people, right?
Hmm.
And then now, I think these days we are starting to awaken to the idea that maybe some of these labels are incorrect.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, let's I totally skipped over the label talk we were going to have first. But since you brought up, let's talk about that a little bit because you know you've got all these labels in your bio, so people can like know who you are, right? So they have a category in their brain to go into. But
right.
even with that, okay, you know, like just to revisit them, right? So it's psychic, medium, tarot reader, sound healer, channeler, and a few more things that can't be repeated.
Some bad words. Yeah.
And then, you know, but you refer to yourself as a spiritualist. Like, talk a little bit about this label thing and like, I don't know, I feel the same way about the whole like coach or, you know, we help people life coach. Like, they just, I hate these labels, but I want to hear them
Right.
from your perspective.
No, I totally agree. I really just think that people need to know, right? They need to know what we stand for, what we do. But the problem that I've always found is particularly in spiritual paths, right?
Mhm.
It's very difficult to like pigeonhole spirit into one, I guess, alignment of working or of truth, right?
Mhm.
People ask me all the time, well, are you a witch? And I always have to say, okay, let's talk about what you mean when you say witch, right?
Mhm.
Because to me, a witch is somebody who practices the Wiccan religion, and that's just how I interpret the label, right?
Mhm.
But to many people, anybody that works with any kind of energy in any sort of way is like a subcategory of witch, right?
Mhm. Okay.
Um, so I don't practice witchcraft. I don't, do the standard ceremonial spells or, work in that kind of way. That's just not the alignment that I am in spiritually. Um, but it does seem to help people to understand the concept of energy work, right?
Mhm.
Um, I had another friend who hosts sound ceremonies, and she calls them Reiki infused sound ceremonies. And I had to ask her, I'm like, are you actually doing Reiki in your sound ceremonies? And she was like, well, no, but that's a label that people associate with the kind of energy work that occurs during a sound ceremony.
Mhm.
And so she uses that label, even though she's not doing Reiki. Um, and it's the same with coach, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're a coach, but it's so broad that you can't really fit yourself into it.
You know, it's interesting. At the time of this recording, and I'm being very specific with this because I was looking at where we were going to release you, right? So, which could be like a month and a half from this recording. So, at the
Mhm.
time of this recording, I really don't like the label coach. And I was talking to my coach, and we were like, okay, we need to redefine what coach is, because I'm just so turned off by the word.
Yep.
It's so much that I'm like, I don't want a coach. And obviously I do it naturally with people, and it's a byproduct of transforming someone's life,
Right.
like, but also at the same time, I definitely have a lot of resistance to it right now because of, I don't know. I just think it's just, I think there's a lot of things that really turn me off about coach in general, like how everybody and their mom's a coach, and how coach doesn't really mean coach. It actually means consultant, but a consultant's not really a coach because they're just telling you what to do and not actually helping you come to it on your own. Like, there's so many nuances. Do you feel like there's similar nuances with some of these like labels that you have? And I'd love to hear you kind of share, just of course from your perspective. So we're not here
Yeah, yeah. Not judging anybody, not saying anybody has to believe the same thing, right?
conversation. Yeah, conversation.
Yeah. I think a lot of the words have expectations tied to
Mhm.
them, and that's part of my problem too. Um, like coach, right? People would have this expectation on what a session would be like with
Mhm.
you if they're familiar with how other coaches work, right?
Yeah.
For me, the one that stands out the most is medium, and I really struggled with how to put this into words because when I when somebody calls me a medium, I used to just respond yes, right?
Mhm.
But then there was this expectation of, oh, can I book a reading with you and speak to my lovely grandmother who passed 5 years ago, right? And then I'd have to explain, no, because that's not the kind of mediumship that I do, right? And I worked a lot with my guides on how to define this and what I should call myself. And they're like, you need to get more comfortable with this because of the expectation that people have.
Mhm.
But then you need to say, most mediums work in order to bring comfort and closure to the living, right? My mediumship is to advocate for the dead. And that seems to get people's attention. They seem to understand that the roles are almost a little reversed. Spirit comes to me and like I don't call them in, like, and it's a different kind of energy that I work with in that
Are
way.
you able to give an example of what advocating for the dead would be?
I have such a good one. I got to be careful about the client privacy here. So, I had a client who was feeling like they were haunted,
Mm.
and I gave them a reading, but it wasn't even a mediumship reading. And it was after the reading was over that I had this little boy show up,
Mm.
and he provided this visual that was so striking that I actually emailed that person right back and said, so I have this boy, here's what he's wearing, here's what he's showing me. And again, I can't go into too many details, but the client's response to me was that they had put something in the casket of
Mm.
that little boy, and it was somebody that they very well knew. Um, and nobody knew that he had snuck that object in there.
Mm.
Um, and so we were able to connect like this playful energy wanting to be recognized, right? With this uh, non-scary entity, right? That
Mhm.
was just wanting that to say thank you and give that acknowledgement that he was aware of what was done for him.
Mhm.
And so that's the sort of thing that I love to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because based on my limited knowledge, right, of medium and those kind of things that we're talking about, it sounds very similar to what, like you said, the traditional medium and the expectation, except for when you see the Long Island medium on TV, for example, which is funny that YouTube showed me as a suggested thing yesterday. And I watched some of her videos and I didn't even realize why I was watching them. Like I couldn't stop. And I think it's for this conversation because it like brought it up, like my awareness. But like watching her, which I know that there's probably controversy about, is she this or that or whatever. But anyways,
Always.
where she's going into a group reading is the way they show it. And she's like, okay, well, there's a female coming through about here. Can you relate to that? Like you said, where she's basically giving a reading for a mom, a grandma, a sister, a brother, where you essentially, this is what I heard, let me know, like you essentially were doing the same thing, but not because someone came to you and said, I really want to connect with my whatever. Like you said,
Right.
it's the departed who are reaching out to you and they're wanting some kind of closure. They're wanting, maybe in this situation, um, the loved one who's still in this realm to acknowledge that the things that are taking place are not scary, or, you know, that they're there.
Right.
There's, they're hanging
Yeah,
out with them, you know.
right.
That's kind of how I heard it.
Yep. And I actually do find that in the work that I do get a lot of the things that are considered scary, right? Or that somebody else would have kind of a fear reaction to. Again, I think that's just the alignment that spirit wants me to work with. And that's the difference. Like, I'm not going to be able to connect with your happy grandma. I know that, right?
Mhm.
But if you have something going on in your house, yeah, that's the stuff I love. So, yeah.
It's interesting, and I'm sure everybody has a different opinion on this, but I just heard this today, that there really is no like evil or bad energy. It's really just a spectrum because we're all really connected. There's just different sides of the spectrum. What is your take on that? Since you deal with the scarier things, right?
Yeah. To me, it is all just frequency, right?
Right.
And if we're the universe, which we're told we are, right? And the universe has both bad and good, and we know we can be both bad and good people, right? We all do dumb things sometimes. Then that means the universe does dumb things sometimes too, because we're the universe.
Right.
Um, so I, I do think that there are, levels of emotion that we don't like and we don't want to be in. Nobody wants to be in anger or pain or frustration. But it is just a vibration.
Mm-hmm.
So, an emotion's an emotion, right? Who are we to judge the vibration as either good or bad? So I do agree with that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and of course, you have so many because of all your labels, right? Because you guys listen to the podcast. We also are putting this on YouTube, so like, like Rick and I are sitting across like the table from each other, essentially having this convo. I do want to kind of bring it back around to tarot because there's so many doors we could open with this, and
Yes, absolutely.
the episode title is, it's like, all right, let's bring it back to tarot. It's like, ooh, Rick's going to be a repeat guest many times to talk about all those different things. Anyway, so tarot, let's go back to that because I think
Yeah.
it was a good like diversion. We went to talk about labels because I feel like what's going to continue to come up is pointing out all of the labels, right? Like with all the,
Right.
if we're bust and miss, and I'm only going to share, and I would love you to share too, when the time's right, I'm going to share the things that maybe I have thought, but not because they were my thoughts, just they were in the environment and I just never looked into them. So it kind of became
Yeah.
my thought, right? Until I was like, I never even thought this. So, um, one thing that came up when you were talking before as a myth to be busted is people who read cards there's nothing to them. They're just reading cards and pulling a card and making it all up, right? Like,
Right.
is legitimacy there, or
Sure.
like kind of like that piece, or the whole like palm reader on the side of the road type of thing that people just do for fun. Love to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that there are many ways that you can choose to read tarot, right? I think that there is, like, just knowing the tarot stories, and we can talk about that too a little later, but knowing the tarot stories gives you access to sort of this very intellectual, reflective space that can be used for meditation, that can be used to almost, it's like, when you see things in clouds and it says
Mhm.
more about your mental state than it does about anything else, right? There's not really a dog in the sky, but, I
Uh-huh.
think tarot can be a mirror like that. And I know a lot of people who really consider it to be just a strictly intellectual exercise, right? They lay out cards, they see it as a reflection of themselves and what they're experiencing and how they're choosing to relate to those stories, right?
Mhm.
And then there's this spiritual component that you can add or not, right? For me, tarot is a spiritual exercise. It's become a ceremony for me. I approach it that way, very ceremonially, because it steps me up into this, like, that spiritual place where I can then receive information that is then confirmed in the stories, right?
Mhm.
Um, So yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong with somebody wanting to treat it as an intellectual exercise, and that's probably a really good way to start to learn tarot, because then you take away that like need to be spiritual with it, right? I think
Okay.
that can be a little overpowering at the beginning.
Mhm. Yeah, and okay, so then another one that just popped in. Okay, well, like it's just cards. So, I shuffle a deck of cards and pull out a ace of hearts. That's not telling me my story versus, like oracle cards, we talked about before, like, the cards jumping out or you're doing a spread or, where's your energy drawn to? Like,
Yeah.
is it just a card? Like, how is it actually telling me anything?
So actually, if you learn the tarot stories, right, you can read tarot with a playing deck, because the playing deck matches the minor arcana in tarot. And I guess we forgot to talk about the tarot structure a little bit, but um, the minor arcana is structured ace through 10 with a tarot court. So if you know how to read tarot, you can actually, that ace of hearts could tell you a story. Right?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. I do think, again, it really is going to be how you want to approach it.
Mhm.
I agree that tarot is ink on paper, right? But just like any other spiritual tool, it depends on how it's approached.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I myself have a bunch of oracle card decks, right? And I love them. I love the inspiration they give. All the messages in oracle are all like fairly positive, uplifting. And I feel like I could be, it's funny. I do honestly sit on the fence with this, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
like, I could pull any card any day, and I bet that whatever is written in the book, whatever's on the card, could absolutely apply to me because it's all
Yeah.
general enough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I will say from experience in pulling cards for myself or having people pull them as part of the service that they're giving, I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, the cards that are pulled are exactly what it is that I'm going through, whatever other
Yeah.
messages have come up or whatever like that extra nudge is that I've needed that day. So I do
Yes.
feel like, and I don't know if this is actually the case because I don't know, do we ever really know? We just have our experience and our understanding is like, I don't know, I feel like if spirit is energy, who's to say they aren't moving the cards around in a way so that the card that you pull out or whatever your process is the one that's exactly what you need? Or how about the times when you shuffle and the same card comes out 3 times in a row?
Right.
Like,
No,
I don't
I definitely agree with you on that. That, again, I do think that it's more about the approach that you take, right? I mean, spirit knows how I shuffle my deck because I do it the same time every
uh-huh,
time, right?
uh-huh,
But one of the questions I actually do get a lot when I teach tarot is, when I'm reading for myself, tarot only tells me what I already know,
mm,
right? How do I step beyond that, right? But I think that's what tarot does. Even in a reading with somebody, like, tarot is telling me, I hope, things that they already know, right?
yeah,
It's more about the validation and confirmation that they're understood by the universe and validated in their path, right? The thing that makes a reading so special is that you might know the things, but I shouldn't, right?
right, right.
Yeah. It's very rare, I would say, although it does happen when something comes out in a reading that is completely like out of left field. And more often than not, when that happens, you get a lot of pushback from somebody, right?
Mhm,
You
mhm.
probably know that as you do your own readings as well, right?
Yeah.
And it's not until months later that you hope they email you back and say, "Oh my gosh, you were right," right?
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, even like I worked with somebody who she's actually been on the podcast before, the angel coach Emily Rivera, and she was helping us with some like an intuitive business coaching and life coaching type stuff. And her process is like she meditates and then writes down whatever's comes through, and then like we talk about that in the and then a mixture of that and also what she's receiving during the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that she had shared with us was we talked about this nomad trip we're on. And then she said, well, I see a vision of you guys with 2 dogs. We're like, psh, we ain't ever getting 2 dogs. No way. Here we are like 3 years later with two
Yep.
dogs.
Yep.
I find that recording because I'm like, I swear she said that we were going to have light colored dog and we do, and it's just, you're right. Cause you're like, that's not true. But,
Yep.
and I agree, like, in the Akashic record readings, I'm like, look, I'm just sharing what comes through. Take it or leave it. But it's
Yep.
likely that this might show up in days to come in some way when
Yep.
you
Yep.
least expect it.
So for me, I actually think it might be like a better reading when that kind of stuff doesn't happen a bunch, when it's more about, oh my gosh, I knew that, how did you, like,
Right, right, right.
okay, that's the universe confirming that
Yeah.
you're right. Right.
Sometimes, like you said, I mean, I totally related to the way that you talked about that with tarot because, the confirmation or the reflection or even the way that it's presented back to the person may not be the same way they've been ruminating about it in their heads.
I
And
say
so
that all the time.
fresh perspective, right? Back at them.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love how the let's just call it a transformation from the reading is very similar, whether it's
Totally.
Akashic record or tarot.
Yep.
There can be a very similar transformation there with that reflection back and the clarity and the understanding and the swift kick in the ass if that's what they need to get moving or whatever, right? Like there's something there.
Yes. Yes.
That's
It's that bird's eye view, right? That sometimes we're stuck in that forest and can't see through the trees, right?
okay. So like you said, we had a plan, but then sometimes the plan doesn't work where we were gonna like tell you what tarot was and the setup, like what are the cards and how is the deck
Yeah.
comprised and all of that. So let's do that now because
Great. Yeah.
right.
Definitely. So tarot, there are a couple of the rules that tarot will always follow with very minor variation, right? Occasionally, a deck creator, especially in the new modern decks, will vary these just a little bit. But for the most part, tarot will always have 78 cards, and those will be divided into 22 major arcana cards, which are the ones you're familiar with. They're the ones with titles like the Lovers, Death, the Devil, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then there's 56 minor arcana cards, 4 suits, numbered ace through 10, and then 16 tarot court cards that also comprised in that 56. So the difference in the playing cards in tarot is that there's one additional court card, right?
Okay.
Um, so the major arcana are kind of like the major life lessons. And if you put them all in order, they tell the story of the Fool. The Fool is the main character in tarot, and the Fool represents each one of us. Not in a bad way, but
Mhm.
when we're born into the world, we're naive, we don't know anything, we haven't figured out our life path, right? And we're kind of starting from nothing. And so the Fool goes through the same life lessons that we do, things like falling in love, realizing that spirituality is maybe more important than the physical things of life, going through like very detrimental challenges, finding hope and inspiration, um, finding his intuition, right? Um, and so if you read the story, it reads a lot like a parable to me. It's very inspirational. You can do that actually on my website. If you go to the card meanings and click on the major arcana, the very first paragraph on all the cards is the Fool's journey. And if
Mhm.
you just read them in order, the story always makes me tear up a little bit. But maybe that's just me. And then the minor arcana are all those little things that happen, all the little lessons in our lives. And so when you put them together in the shuffled sense, you get that picture of maybe what somebody happens to be going through at that time.
Mhm. And I put on YouTube, I had to think, like I had to put it on the screen on YouTube, Tarot Fellow. That's where his website is. And now I
Great.
started on the podcast, Tarot Fellow.
Awesome.
No, that's awesome. Okay. So what would be a good reason? I'm sure there's many. What would be a good reason for someone to get into tarot, whether it be for themselves and get their first deck, or to go to a reading, or even like you teach tarot, like go to a workshop? Like, what do you feel like would be a good little nudge or like sign or a reason for them to lean in and do this?
I think the reason to go to a reading versus maybe experimenting with tarot a little bit yourself is going to be different. Somebody who really loves stories and it does better with that sort of creative storytelling versus maybe that raw intuition or disconnected intuition. Um, the, the, the stories to me are really what sets tarot apart. Every card has a story. And when you learn that story, the nuances are just incredibly powerful. I'm a storyteller. I love stories. And so tarot just clicks for me because of that, right? Um, I think people find it a little overwhelming when they go to memorize tarot keywords and things like that. And I would never recommend that's how you learn tarot. That's how I learned, and it was horrible. Right? Learn by the stories.
Okay.
Learn those stories because they're so memorable. To go to a reading, I think the reason that people like tarot readings is because there is this familiarity, but yet there's also still this hint of taboo, which I know we talked about a little bit. But I really do think that as human beings, we are drawn to things that are a little taboo. And it's almost a safe, confirmed, easier way to kind of not only experience a reading, but validate that reading. You know, you can take pictures of the cards. Hopefully the reader lets you do that. I always do, right? So that you can then go home, read the stories yourself, and maybe even pick up things that the reader didn't from that reading.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
What how did you get into tarot? Like how did you find it?
Oh yeah. So I grew up very religious, and so it was a little strange that it found me. Um, I went to college, kind of my first foray out of the house bubble, and I had a friend who wanted to go to a metaphysical shop, and I went with her, and the shop owner handed me a deck of cards and said, "You, I don't know why, but you need these." And at the time, and even still now, I'm just kind of like, yeah, she was just trying to sell something. But man, was she right. Because I took them home and I started going through them. And for me, the draw was that occult taboo. My religion taught me this was bad, and it's super exciting because of that, right?
Rebel you.
Yeah, right. A little rebel, I guess. Uh, but I found that like I just really connected with them, and immediately I had people requesting readings. Just having the deck made people request readings, and that gave me this insight and connection to people as well, which when you're in college and in a new environment was very uplifting and validating and needed for me at the time. So yeah, that's how it was for me.
Okay, so then how to, fast forward and now you have this shop with over, what was it, 7,000 different products?
Yeah.
How did that then
Yeah.
come into play? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so that comes back to that spiritual advocacy thing. And I'll tell you what, I really struggle because from a business perspective and a marketing perspective, right? Even my husband is always telling me, you should be selling products that you use, right? Then they have that personal connection to you. Like it's easier to market. You don't have people getting lost in the stores because there's so many categories. But I just can't bring myself to not have something available for somebody. For example, the witch who practices Wiccan, right? Like I want them to be able to find the cauldrons and the candles and the herbs that they need, even though I don't have that personal connection, because I want to support them on that path, right? So I struggle with that a bit. What the advocacy versus business acumen, right? And I'm not very good at the business stuff. Um, so yeah, I do carry 400 tarot and oracle decks.
Wow.
Anything that's in print, pretty much. I don't have distributors for a lot of the indie decks, unfortunately. But all of the ones published through all the big publishers I have. And again, because I want somebody who relates to those tarot stories, right? And finds that imagery that they just love. Not everybody likes the Rider-Waite tarot deck, right? And so to just sell that one, I think would be doing a disservice to the community.
So now I'm really curious. I didn't look myself. So you said, to have everything there. So do you have oracle cards too?
Oh,
Or
totally. Yeah.
so you have oracle
Yeah.
cards? 'Cause it's like
Oh,
tarot.
yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't think to come there for
I
oracle.
know, right? See, that's the marketing piece. How do I do it? Yeah. Yeah. Alana Fairchild,
Okay.
Colette Baron Reed. I've got a whole bunch of their decks. I love Alana Fairchild's
Oh my
decks.
gosh.
So yeah, they're all there. Yep.
Yeah. So how does your process work? Because I'm thinking, okay, I'm just for sake of conversation, you could go to Amazon and buy a deck, or you could
Yeah.
go support Rick. So
Yeah.
like, how does it work? Do I like just does it work just similar where I log on like I would Amazon and just buy and it ships to me, or like?
Yeah, I actually just added an Amazon style search bar at the top because, again, filtering through all those products is tough. So if you know what you want, you just type it in the search bar, it'll just pop up, which is very nice. Um, the reason that I would try to stay away from Amazon a little bit with tarot decks, if you or at least read the reviews. I recently posted an article about the scamming going on in the tarot community, and I have a creator of the True Black Tarot in particular, which is this incredible indie deck that has been manufactured to this like super crazy standard. And his deck has now been stolen and is being sold on Amazon, and he can't get Amazon to remove it, right?
Wow.
And you'll see Amazon reviews of miscut cards and colors being wrong and all these problems because of all these marketplace vendors, right?
Mhm.
Who come in and are printing cheap decks because a lot of the deck artwork is actually in the public domain. US Games, for example, owns the box of the Rider Waite deck and the back print of the card. But the
Mhm.
actual Rider Waite imagery is public domain.
Mhm.
So anybody can print it. But that means anybody can sell it on Amazon, and you're not going to get necessarily the official deck. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I would think too, I mean, if we're talking about this is my personal take, and I'd love to hear yours, is I feel like, okay, if we're talking about the spiritual side of things, I personally would rather have a true authentic deck that was created and infused with the energy from the creator of it.
yeah,
Because then I feel like, if you're talking about clear channel and you're talking about all these different things with spirituality and making sure that your intentions are there, I mean, I'm sure you can still get great readings from these rip-off decks, but I would rather want that like truly from the artist, the intention of it, the energy with it, like, you know what
yeah,
I mean? And not to get like have these off readings, you know.
totally. And in fact, that I even like really researched the distributors and the importers, right?
Mhm.
Because I want to make sure that like the distributor that I use is this absolutely phenomenal, incredibly spiritually approach to their business, right? They're kind of a big family, and they built their building into a pyramid, like that they send all the packages through,
Right.
like
Okay.
like it's really beautiful, just this kind of approach. And so even though the deck might be printed by a mass market publisher like Hay House or
Right.
Llewellyn,
Right.
right? It gets this little bit of extra attention, and to me that was really important.
Mhm.
um, and that said, I don't want to like discourage anybody from, I think, what was it, Sephora was selling some metaphysical supplies a
Are
while
they?
ago, like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, Amazon, like,
Yeah.
don't let that like ruin your ability to get into it, right?
Mhm.
But it is something to maybe consider.
Yeah, just to be aware of. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Um, totally. I totally get that, and I appreciate you sharing that too, and now I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I wanna send your site to all my friends and be like, hey guys, next time you're gonna shop for something metaphysical, check out my friend's site first."
oh
You know,
yes,
like,
buy local, but if you can't find it there, right? Yeah.
"Okay, businessman, buy local
All
first, then
right. Sorry.
go buy from your local shop, then buy from me." No,
Yeah.
I get it, because that's important to you as well, and, you
Yeah.
know, uh, yeah, like, I think this is so cool. So, if people want to get a reading from you or talk to you more or follow you or learn about tarot or I don't know, whatever. Like,
Yes.
what are you open to? What's available right now? Like, where can they find you?
Yeah. So all of my social media is Tarot Fellow, all one word, all run together, except on Instagram. There's a dot between Tarot and Fellow. There's a long story there. um, tarotfellow.com is the website. You can definitely go there and find all the social media. You can book. My reading calendar is present there. So I do remote and in person. If you're in St. Pete, Florida, I would love to have you over. But I know that remote is a lot easier for people.
Yes, and anybody listening to this or watching this who personally knows me and lives in the Tampa Bay area, if you want a direct connection to Rick, I will connect you guys for sure.
Love it.
Some of you who
Yeah.
are local to Tampa Bay who are listening to this, and I will help facilitate any, connections there for you.
Definitely. I answer my DMs probably faster than I answer the phone. So by all means, reach out any way you can.
So awesome. So as we wrap up this tarot episode, let's give a little teaser into what next week's episode will be. So we're going to be talking a bit about your ability to channel and how you've been trans-channeling and channeling a group called The Collective. Are there other teasers we can put out there without telling the whole scoop?
Oh, it's new to me, so it's scary and awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about that same type of thing. We're going to talk about, what is trans channeling. We're going to debunk some of the things. And you're going to have a very special channeled message from the collective that Rick is facilitating on that episode. And it's so, Rick, I didn't tell you this, but this is so exciting. So I've been telling some of my friends, like, oh, yeah, I'm recording a podcast episode. And I'm telling them, like, oh, I'm doing this great episode with Rick. We're going to talk about tarot. Then we're going to talk about channel. We're going to do a channel message. And they're like, when's it coming out? I hear it. Is it out yet? And I'm like, I haven't even recorded it yet. No, it's not out yet.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there's already some people looking forward to these episodes.
Oh, thank you very much.
Of course, anything that you feel like is important to touch on about tarot or about like the concepts we talked about today that you feel like we missed that you want to make sure.
I want to tell one more short story.
Yes, please.
About debunking the evilness of tarot. So I brought up really fast that I grew up in a very religious household. I was Mormon, LDS, and my family still very much is. My last tarot course that I was teaching, my mom had booked to fly out and visit us. And she ended up being there for the first 2 weeks of that tarot course, which is the first 2 weeks are covering the Fool's Journey through the major arcana. And she sat in on that class, which surprised me because of her very strong, still religious beliefs. And now she has gone home and is telling all of her friends about how cool the Fool's Journey is and how tarot's not evil. and she's this incredibly religious woman. And I just love that I got to have that very personal relationship open up to the understanding of the tarot. And
That's so
yeah, I found that beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it continues to demonstrate that a lot of the things that we're afraid of or we're fearful about are usually things that, not always, of course, but usually things that we just don't know anything about, whether it be a group of people or a way of living or a place in the world or people. It's usually because we just we don't have enough information.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like too, like once you have the information, then you can make a decision, but don't make a decision based on zero information.
Right.
I love that. That's because it's like she had her information and she still could have been like, this is crazy. Love you, Rick. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But then also it gave her the opportunity to have a new set of information to go, this is actually quite interesting.
Right.
That's beautiful. All right, Rick. Well, thank you for being here. Guys, thanks for listening. And we will see you on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you.